Hey everyone, before we get started, YouTube shows that only 30% of my viewers are subscribed to the channel, and we're getting pretty close to 1,000,000 subs. Subscribing is free and it helps me out immensely, so please know that it is appreciated. I hope you all enjoy the video. My wife Lacey was in a car crash in April of 2020. Well, not so much a car crash as a car ringing her at a crossroads at 54 miles per hour. She hit the pavement so hard that it fractured parts of her throat and collarbone. Her left arm broken in 3 places. It was brutal. As I stayed with her and her family in the hospital, we had plenty of worries. She had a serious concussion, and we were anxious that it might lead to something permanent. The doctors kept talking about the use of her left arm and her fine motor skills. It was only one single nurse who touched upon what would turn out to be the most permanent damage: her throat. At first, the doctors just told her not to speak. We were told that she had to rest and regain her strength, so there would be no talking for weeks as her throat had to heal. She also had to wear a sort of neck brace. This awful-looking metallic thing. She was in desperately low spirits, but so thankful for everything that we did. As the weeks turned to months, most of her fractures and her broken bones had healed, but not her throat. Lacey still couldn't talk no matter how much she tried. I remember once when we stood in the kitchen, I looked her in the eyes and told her that I loved her. And all she could say back was this wheezing whistle. She had some sort of panic attack and locked herself in the bathroom trying to scream. We went through a lot of trouble trying to restore her voice. Hour after hour of strenuous exercises. She even had a few minor surgeries. At one point, Lacey started drinking this sort of home remedy from something that she had learned online. She got stomach cramps for about 3 days afterward. No wonder though. Most of that recipe was only rosemary, olive oil, and some bullshit flower extract that you could order online. The result was always the same. Lacey locked herself in the bathroom and cried. A parade of disappointment. I grew impatient seeing her in despair over and over, so I joined her in a hunt for treatment. But it had to be something guaranteed. I couldn't bear to see her disappointed again. Trying to find something to restore a broken voice is close to impossible online. Just sorting through all the scams is a full-time job. Whenever I had a few minutes over at work, I would post in forums and check search alerts. I had to open up a second email account just to handle the sign-up spam. I got a few earnest responses, but most of it just linked to dead ends or holistic nonsense. There were a few genuine responses with links to articles, experimental treatments, and up-and-coming technology. Nothing was accessible or even realistic. It took me 3 weeks to get an email that I cared to read all the way through. It came from an auto-generated email account, but somehow got through my spam filter. It read, "Don't worry, I know what you're going through. I know someone who can help. Don't be alarmed and follow these simple steps. 1. Plant and care for the seeds. 2. Welcome the guest. 3. Listen to the song. 4. Don't pick the white one." At first, I didn't think much of it. It was strange, but anyone who's been online for a longer period of time knows that people like to make up stuff all the time. I just put it aside and thought no more of it. That is until 3 days later when there was a small white envelope dropped on our doorstep. Inside, there was an unmarked package of seeds. I considered flushing them down the toilet, but I couldn't. The bathroom door was locked. Again, Lacey was crying. The sound of her broken throat, sniffling over the sink, broke my heart. as so many times before. I opened my mouth to speak, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Even if there was close to no chance of this working, I had to try. I would do anything to make her happy again. I just wanted to hear her call me Sunny Bear again. Cutest nickname I'd ever had. So I planted the seeds in our flower bed in the front yard, watered them, and cursed myself for being an idiot. Seeds turned to sprouts and then turned to stalks. From these stalks came buds, and from those flowers came these radiant, royal blue sunflowers. It took less than a month, and even though they were smaller than ordinary sunflowers, Lacey loved them. She tried to bring a few into the house in a pot, but they kept dying. We decided on just leaving them to be outside, letting them grow and to cheer us up whenever we left the house. Not that we went outside much. 2020 was one hell of a year. One night, Lacey and I had a bit of a fight. She got easily flustered whenever I talked too much, as she couldn't effectively talk back. So whenever I got a bit too talkative, she would leave the room. It frustrated me having to keep my thoughts on a short leash. Usually, we could talk about anything at any time, but now I had to walk on eggshells. No wonder I started spending more time soldering knickknacks in the garage. We could barely be in the same room anymore. As I was repairing our front door lamp, I noticed a shadow on our driveway. It wasn't technically our property, but it was clear that they were observing me from the road. I couldn't make heads or tails of their frame, but it was clearly a normal-sized person, possibly wearing a large coat. "Can I help you?" I asked loudly. There was no response. A brisk wind rattled the flower bed, which reminded me of that email that I got way back. It takes so little for the mind to travel to the most obscure crevices. "I think I'm supposed to welcome you," I said. "If not, well, have a good night." As I started walking back to the front door, I kept talking. It was nice to just talk again. "But just, you are welcome, just to clarify." I took one more look back at the shadow in the driveway, only to notice that it was gone. Over the coming days, I would notice Lacey standing by the window. I would ask her a few times what she saw, but she would just sigh and walk away. Soon, I stopped asking. Several times a day, she would stand by the front door and look out the window. And every time, she would look in the same direction as to where I had seen that shadow of a person standing in the driveway. And yet there was nothing there, not that I saw. It was by now that we had started sleeping in separate beds. She had expressed how she felt pressured and sort of intruded upon, and that she had wished for us to find our way back to each other with love, rather than obligation and a sense of a must. I couldn't blame her. Marriage takes work, and she wouldn't be happier if I forced her to do something that she was uncomfortable with. Instead, I started sleeping in the guest bedroom. She would still be kind enough to make the bed while I was at work though, so not at all was lost. There was a warmth between us still. I didn't even think about the third item on the list. Listen to the song. What song? It didn't make any sense. Yet I found myself thinking about that list more and more. I had done 2 things on it, and it hardly took any effort at all. It was almost as if it was being done to me, rather than the other way around. But there was no song to listen to. At least there wasn't until I started listening to Lacey. I don't know how long she had been humming it. It was that kind of droning background noise that had always just been there. She could still hum and hit all tunes, but I had no idea what the song actually was. So one day I just kissed her on the cheek and asked her about it. No idea. She responded with her text-to-speech app, a nursery rhyme. It kinda had the tune for it, calm, a bit melancholic, music boxy in a way. There was no way to just search for the tune, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Hell, if it were 3 points on a 4-point list, I might as well go all the way. I started humming it too, in fact. I hummed it so much that I started to make up my own words for it in my head. At one point, during lunch hour, I stopped to put it all in writing just to see what Lacey would think. I wrote, "You're my friend, I'll sing your tune. A setting sun to rising moon. I ask you, buddy, buddy blue, won't you be my sunflower too?" I showed it to her as soon as I got home. To say Lacey didn't care for it would be an understatement. She just stared at the paper. She was lost for words in more ways than usual. I tried talking to her, but she was growing hysterical. Again, she locked herself in the bathroom, crying harder than usual. This time, I took it pretty hard. "Just fucking talk to me," I screamed, pounding at the door. "Just use the damn app. Make a fucking effort." No response, just more crying. "Lacey, for the love of God, you gotta give me something to work with. Just please, just make an effort. I'm right here. You're the one locking the door. I'm standing right here, I'm with you, please." And yet, despite all the pounding and all the yelling, the door stayed locked. A paper slid off from underneath the door. It was the lyrics that I had made up for the song, with a big "fuck you" written across it with an eyeliner. That night, I was near the breaking point. We were getting into November and even the blue sunflowers were getting dry. I took a 2-hour walk through what was quickly turning into a harsh storm, blowing leaves into my face the entire way. When I finally got to a nearby restaurant turned bar, I decided to take out my frustrations on whatever number of drinks it would take me to calm the fuck down. Right next to me were 2 guys who worked at the street mill about half an hour's drive south. I had seen them around town, but we never really talked before. Still, after living the life that I had lived for the past few months, I wanted nothing more than to talk until my throat was sore. They seemed eager enough to keep a conversation going. If nothing else, at least we could all complain about work. 3 drinks in, I started talking about Lacey and her condition. One of the brothers just nodded along, but the other looked at me curiously. As I stumbled into the topic of the strange email that I had gotten, he just stared at me. "I've heard that," he said. "Ain't that the silver tongue game?" The brothers looked at one another. "Yeah, you're right." The other brother coughed, slack-jawed. "That takes me back. Apparently, the silver tongue game was something that kids who wanted to be great singers used to play back in the 1910s. It was still a local topic of conversation, sort of a forgotten superstition. Not that they had mentioned it, I could vaguely remember hearing about it. The first rule to planting care for the seed was not meant to be so literal. Originally, it was about daring kids to swallow sunflower seeds and then drink as much water as they could. The second rule, to welcome the guest, was a metaphor for breaking a rule. Kids weren't supposed to welcome guests into their house, so to welcome a guest was shorthand for doing something you're not supposed to. The third rule, to listen to the song, was to sing a specific nursery rhyme where others could hear it. Anyone who knew of the game would recognize it and punish you, but most adults tend to forget it as they grow up. "And then there's the fourth one," said the now drunk second brother. "Don't pick the white one." "That's still the same as it was back then." "But what does it mean?" "It means what it means. Don't pick the white one," he shrugged. "When the devil comes to give you a new tongue, don't pick the white one. It looks the most like silver, but it ain't." I stepped away to text Lacey, but I got no response. The wind was picking up outside, and I was starting to worry about getting home in one piece. The brothers were calling it a night, but they weren't in any condition to drive. They had an Uber coming, but they were going the other way, so we said our goodbyes. I was left standing in the parking lot, not knowing where to go or what to do. Finally, I just started walking, and the walk turned into a jog, and the jog turned into intermittent sprints. A thought hit me. I hadn't followed the rules. I hadn't swallowed any sunflower seeds. I hadn't broken any convictions or done what I wasn't supposed to do. I wasn't the one who had started to sing that song either. Lacey did. Had she done all the same things but the right way? If so, was she on the final step? What had she been doing? I was getting worried, and I knew that it was all superstition, but these sunflower seeds had shown up on our doorstep. There had been a stranger there watching us. Lacey had been acting strange lately, and she had been locking herself in the bathroom more frequently. Had we been doing the same thing without telling one another? I got back home around midnight, hands frozen stiff. My heart was pounding and I didn't even know why. I was getting anxious and I fumbled for my house keys as I walked up the driveway, only to realize that the front door was open. I don't know at what point I started saying, "No, no, no" to myself, but there it was, repeated like a fucking Hare Krishna mantra. "Lacey?" I called out. The house was quiet, except for the wind forcing itself through the cracks in the front door. I hurried to the bathroom, only to see that it was still locked. I pounded on the door, but it was useless. I ran out to fetch my tools, only to see a shadow standing in the driveway. I don't know if it was the same thing that I had seen before, but there was one difference between this time and the first time that I had seen them. I had fixed the light that goes above the front door. As I hit the switch, the intruder stepped out of the shadows. I'll never forget the sight of this woman, easily 6'5", but all hunched up in a crouch. She had this wild, bush-like black hair that pointed in all directions. Her skin had this metallic gray and blue tone with a dry and hardened texture, like cracked leather. At first, I didn't even think that she had a face, as it was so thin that I could see more of her skull than her features. Her eyes were completely covered in gray, and her pale lips were retracted in a forced smile. She was emaciated beyond what I thought a human could survive, and wearing nothing but a large, fur-like cloak. I could see the edge of her naked knees, her feet and elbows sticking out, and there was something on the inside of her cloak. Tongues? "No," my mantra continued. "No, no, no." Her face barely moved, but it didn't take much for me to realize that her mouth had curled into a smile. I started backing away into my garage, and she started sprinting towards me. I slammed the door down and pressed the lock. I stumbled over my workbench, knocking over tools and cables as I reached for the lock on the side door. As I clicked it shut, I picked up the biggest wrench that I could find and stepped back into the middle of the room. I could barely hear the wind outside as my heart swallowed all the sounds, all but one. "Sunny Bear, are you there?" It was a voice. It took my reptile brain a few seconds to recognize it. I hadn't heard it in so long. That was Lacey's voice. Now, I was the one who locked myself in a room, hearing my loved one trying to get in. But if it wasn't her, it couldn't be. That thing out there had to be something else. That couldn't be my Lacey. But still, no one else called me Sunny Bear. No one. "That's not you," I said. "It can't be you." "It's me, baby, open up." "No, fuck you." "You're not thinking straight, let's talk about this." "Tell me what you wrote on the note." It got quiet. The wind was howling outside, drowning out my thoughts. My heart was pounding so hard that I could feel it turning my stomach. I was gonna be sick. "Tell me what you wrote." No response. I fucking knew it. It felt like an eternity, but it must have been no more than 10 seconds that had passed. Come out and she'll get a new one, the lacy voice said, slowly shifting pitch. I don't fucking trust you. She chose the white one, you know. The voice had turned venomous and dark, only keeping a vague cadence of what used to be lacy. What does that even mean? You'll see, Sonny Bear. Just go away. You'll never hear her again. No more whispers and no more songs. This pissed me off to no end. My mood swung from a complete, tear-drenched panic into a stomach acid-fueled rage. I swallowed my thoughts, feeling my dry tongue stick against the corners of my mouth. I tightened the grip on my wrench as I opened the side door. Nothing. I hurried inside the house and, using the wrench, managed to break the lock on the bathroom door. There on the floor was Lacey. Her tongue was swollen and white and her eyes were blank and she wasn't breathing. I just fell to my knees, dropping the wrench. I took her into my arms, just repeating the same thing over and over. No, no, no. I had to try something. I fumbled my phone out of my pocket and dialed 911 on speakerphone as I started giving her CPR. Every breath that I blew into her mouth tasted a foul copper, but there was nothing that I wouldn't do. I could barely register a conscious thought as I screamed for help. I don't know how long we stayed there on the tear-stained floor. All I know is that after an eternity had passed, and as I heard an ambulance rolling up in the driveway, Lacey gasped for breath. As we locked eyes, I smiled. We didn't have to say a word to communicate. Yes, I love you too. Large parts of her tongue had to be removed. It was some sort of infection that spread to her mouth, and she was in a serious condition. Her blood levels were all over the place, but still, she eventually recovered. Today, Lacey's throat is fine, and she still can't talk, but we're doing better. The trauma is there, but she's seeing a regular therapist and working through her diagnosed PTSD. Still, I'm not sure if I trust that therapist. Dr. Jane gives me some creepy vibes. Lacey and I are doing fine. There are so many things that can be said without words, and when the need arises, we've started to adapt to new tools and tricks. Whiteboards on the fridge for good morning greetings, just mouthing I love you as I leave for work, and an earnest smile when I get back home. As I suspected, Lacey had been following the same rules as I had, but she had a bit more context. She had ordered the same type of sunflowers that kids used to eat the seeds off of back in 1910. The obscure one that she had bought from a collector. As for the second rule of doing something she wasn't supposed to, she had started smoking in the bathroom. And the song, well, I don't know what it meant. Singing it in front of me was a part of the game. The only problem was the fourth rule, not to pick the white one. Recently, I dared to ask her about what really happened that night, why she chose the white one, and why she allowed herself to be tracked. It was in the rules not to pick it, after all, so how could she fall for it? That's the trick, Lacey told me. They're all white. I was looking through my old computer and found my old blogs from when I had traveled a lot. Unfortunately, I don't go out much, if at all, these days. I was reading through them, and there are a few quite profound, horrifying experiences that I had had over the years. I'm glad that I documented these trips because I can't really remember any of this, and I would have probably never believed it if somebody had told me. I have decided to post them here for you all to have a look and hope that I don't come across as crazy. I wrote these as they happened at the time. These are true events, the places, the names, the events themselves. Nothing has been edited. The hotel that only sleeps one. Summer 2013. First trip of the summer. June 1st, Saturday, 9:33 a.m. My name is Steve. I live in a city called Dundee in Scotland. We have the Highlands right on our doorstep and breathtaking scenery just minutes from the city. It's a fantastic place to live. I work in a school, so I have the whole summer off every year to do what I want. Normally spending the final few weeks of term planning trips to remote locations all across the UK. I like to go and visit great hiking spots, climb mountains, fishing trips, sailing, you name it. These are my blogs. I like to keep records of all my trips and share them on various forums and sites, mostly to do with tourism in Scotland, but also other parts of the UK, for anyone who may be thinking of exploring little-known places that might be near them, or even anyone possibly looking to come to the UK for a vacation or to live or to study or whatever reason. This will be a record of my first trip of 2013. There's a place way up in the far north of Scotland called Cailescue. It looks beautiful from what I've seen. There's a small 17th century hotel there called the Cailescue Hotel. It is right in the bank of the Loch Glendu, which translates to English as a Black Glen. For those who don't know, in Scotland, a glen is a term for a deep valley, and the loch is a Scottish or Gaelic term for a body of water, essentially a lake. You may have heard of Loch Lomond or Loch Ness, perhaps more likely the Loch Ness Monster. I urge you to check it out so you can see how beautiful this place is. I truly hope that one day you might be able to visit it yourself. Now, I've been trying for over 2 years to get a room at this hotel, but every time that I check the availability, there's only ever one single room with a single bed available. I mean all year round, not just in the summertime. As I was always traveling with my girlfriend, this wasn't an option, so I checked daily, waiting for another room to become available. Maybe I would get lucky with a cancellation. Unfortunately, we had separated 2 months ago, and I just checked, the single room is available. So I booked the room for 5 nights. I've packed my things and I'm making the 4.5-hour drive to Cailescue today. I can't wait. I'll keep my blog updated on my travels as I go on. For now, I'm about to leave. The car is packed and I have a coffee, some snacks, and a playlist at the ready. June 1st, Saturday, 12:45 p.m. I made a quick stop to stretch my legs, running about 15 minutes behind schedule, but these roads sometimes are a bit of a pain. I saw this little place on the map, and I had never heard of it before. It's called Rogu Falls. It's a bit of a walk through some woods from the car park, but it is so worth it. Once you come out at the other end, there's a little wooden pathway leading to a bridge that crosses over a river called the Blackwater. Pure coincidence, I must add. It had nothing to do with the Black Glen. The falls are beautiful and the trail is easy to navigate. I met a young Welsh family on the way, who was also heading north to Skye Portree to be exact. Portree has been one of my favorite destinations and I couldn't recommend it enough. I made my way back to the car, after a few photos and some more exploring. I'm sure that you can fish for salmon in this river, but unfortunately I had to go. I will definitely come back one day for that. Just about to set off for the remainder of the drive. June 1st, Saturday, 3:35 p.m. Just arrived at Cailescue. It took a bit longer than I had expected or hoped, but wow. There are actually 3 lochs here which I wasn't aware of. The scenery is absolutely out of this world. Rolling hills and mountains in the backdrop, surrounded by almost nothing but fields and lochs. My check-in time is 4 p.m., so I took the time to have a wander around the area. Cailescue appears to be mainly just a single road off the A894. If you check it on a map, you'll see what I mean. There are a few houses on the road towards Loch Glendow, and a little building that seems like a public toilet. Then at the end is the hotel, and it looks nice enough to be fully booked, but it looks quite empty. In fact, I haven't seen a single person since I got here. I went back along the road to the way that I had come from and made the short walk to the Kailaskew Bridge. It was a nice little road bridge over the loch. You can just about hear the water below, which is very calm, complemented by these stunning views. I walked back to the hotel, but just before I checked in, I noticed that behind the hotel was a little maze which I'll have to explore. But for now, I need to get in and lie down and possibly get something to eat. June 1st, Saturday, 4:15 p.m. Okay, so I went to the door. I still haven't seen a single soul in this whole place, and it was locked. So I knocked and rang the bell. Eventually, after a bit of a wait, a tall, finely dressed older woman had answered. She had dark red hair and large green eyes that seemed to draw your gaze. "Ah, Mr. Quinn, we've been expecting you." She spoke in a soft, eloquent manner with an upper-class-sounding accent. She continued, "Miss Wise, a pleasure to meet you." She extended a hand towards me and then swung it around, crossing the threshold of the door and ushering me into the hotel. She looked stern, and there's an air of professionalism with every word and movement. Basically, she didn't look like she took any shit, and would swiftly solve the problem if you started any. I followed Mrs. Weiss to the reception desk. She went behind the counter and I approached, smiling. "I believe you had a smooth journey," she asked, flicking through some papers behind the desk. She pulled out a document and began typing on an old desktop computer. Yeah, I did, thank you. A little bit behind schedule, but it was fine," I replied. "You must run a fine establishment here because it's almost impossible to get a room." She shot a quick glance at me from the computer screen, and the sides of her mouth crept up to a slight smile. She looked back and continued typing. I put my folded arms on the reception desk and leaned in a little closer. "So," I began, trying to break the ever-growing uncomfortable silence. "I take it there's plenty to do around here. Seems pretty quiet for a fully booked hotel." I chuckled in a jesting manner. She never replied. She simply turned to a wall with a bunch of hooks and numbers where only one single key hung. I turned my head quickly, just having a swift, curious look at the computer screen. It wasn't even on. I heard Miss Wise clear her throat as she caught me looking confused at the screen. "Room 28, she said, handing me the key. An unnecessarily large block of wood with a black 28 was crudely scrawled into it, and a single huge brass key attached with a key ring, presumably so nobody would lose it. I took the key, smiled, and thanked Miss Wise. Her large green eyes held mine for a few seconds. Before I got lost in them, I turned toward the hallway. I stopped. "Is this the right way?" I asked, unsure of myself. "Straight down the hall, take the stairs on the right, one floor up and back down the hallway to the end. The room is directly above where we're standing right now." She replied with her long, red-lipped smile baring her perfect white teeth. Her eyes gazed into mine, unfaltering. If she wasn't quite so comforting and warm, it would have probably creeped me out. But something about her just made me feel like I was at home, safe. I felt an almost maternal bond between us. I made my way to the stairwell, listening intently for signs of life in other rooms. Room 11 seemed to have a TV on. I felt like that was confirmation that other residents were definitely here. I continue up the stairs, an old wooden staircase in a large brick shell. I assume that it is part of the original 17th century building. Some parts of the hotel have been restored and added to over the years, but much of the original structure remains. I have a thing for old buildings, and I like to wonder, who laid these bricks? Who has walked these same stairs? What stories and memories have been carved into the history of this centuries-old building? If only these walls could talk. I arrive at my room. The block makes an annoying racket as it rattles my door while I struggle to turn the key in the ancient-looking giant lock. It's probably about 300 years old too, I tell myself. Eventually it yields and the door creaks open. The room smells like incense. It was pretty large with a nice thick red carpet, antique-looking wooden furniture, including an old-school vanity table thing with a mirror and light bulbs all around it, a very dated TV, and surprisingly, a massive 4-post bed. It made me wonder why this room was only available for one person, when it's definitely large enough for two. I checked out the bathroom, which was located right by the entrance to the room, and immediately left as I walked in. It was immaculately white and clean with a huge bathtub and a shower attachment. I was happy with that. I went back into the room and opened my case to start putting my clothes away. The bedside alarm clock read 4:32 p.m. On the table next to my bed lay a small pamphlet with a map of the area, things to do locally, and information about checking in and out, dinner, breakfast, and the bar. I had a quick glance. Dinner begins at 7 p.m. until 11 p.m. Last dinner order was at 10:30. Buffet breakfast from 6 a.m. until 10 a.m. Lunch available from 12 p.m. until 3:30 p.m. The menus look good. I'll definitely try lunch and dinner at some point. Breakfast is included in the room rate, which is always a bonus. I continued unpacking, turned to put my stuff in the drawers of the dresser behind me and unpack the rest of my things. Now it's time for a bath and then I'll get ready to go for some dinner at about 6:45. June 1st, Saturday, 7:20 p.m. As I walked down to the bar, I heard a baby crying from the room 2 doors down from me, number 24. I slowed myself down just to get a listen to see if I could hear the baby's parents. I heard the hushing sound, but no words. As I walked down the stairs before I got to the bottom, I heard the stairwell door from my landing open and close, and then footsteps made their way down. I slowed down again to catch a glimpse, but they stopped after only a few steps. I decided to carry on to the bar. For some reason, I feel like I'm desperately seeking an encounter with another guest of the hotel. Any guest. Not sure if it's due to loneliness or just out of sheer curiosity. The walk through the empty lobby is normal. Mrs. Weiss, who is dutifully posted at the reception, acknowledged me and gave a tender smile. I nodded and smiled back at her. I entered the bar and not a single person in here, either aside from one solitary bartender. I'm beginning to get some Shining vibes here. The bartender smiles at me and gestures to a stool at the bar for me to sit, and then stares at me the whole way over. "Good evening. What can I get you, sir?" he said, still smiling wide. His mouth didn't seem to move much from its apparently permanent smile. His eyes almost protruded from his head. He is tall and bulky, quite a large, scary-looking guy, but definitely friendly enough from what I could gather. "I'll have a double Glenmorangie, no ice, please," I replied, smiling back. Can I charge it to room 28, I asked. "Of course you can, sir." He turned, smiling as he spoke, although it seemed like his mouth didn't move at all this time. The bartender turned and handed me my whiskey. "Enjoy," he said, still smiling. I'm sure that his mouth definitely moved that time. I don't know what I'm thinking here. I had a sip and drummed my fingers on the table, looking around the empty room and glancing at the double door, hoping to God that someone else was coming in. About 20 minutes had passed and not a word was spoken in the bar apart from me ordering another drink. The bartender just stood smiling, cleaning a tall glass. I don't even remember if he ever changed the glass in his hand. Then a man in a red blazer appeared behind me. "Mr. Quinn," he said softly, "may I show you to your seat?" I turned and smiled, getting off my stool. "Right this way, sir," He began walking. I was sat at a round table set for 4. Again, nobody in the restaurant area except for me. The restaurant's seating runs parallel to the bar with floor-to-ceiling windows and 2 glass double doors, as a partition so you can see into the bar and restaurant wherever you're sitting. The silence was beginning to get to me. The only noise was the clinking of my cutlery on my plate. No talking, no laughing or music or anything. The bartender still stood smiling, cleaning what I am sure is still the same tall glass. Everything seemed so robotic. My dinner, by the way, was delicious and I had a steak. A huge slab of ribeye cooked and seasoned to perfection, with a side of potatoes and some vegetables. 10 out of 10 for the food, 7 out of 10 for service, 0 out of 10 for atmosphere. I wanted another drink before I retired to my room, but the bartender was really beginning to give me a very strange feeling. I didn't like it, so I decided that I would go to the room and order a drink to be brought up. June 1st, at 10:10 p.m. I need to quickly write up what just happened. I left the bar area, and Miss Weiss was still standing completely still at the reception. She didn't even acknowledge me this time. The TV was still playing from room number 11. Rooms 6, 9, 12, and 14 had TVs on, which I can't make sense of as I've seen nobody at all aside from the odd staff members. I literally haven't seen anyone walk in or out of this building. Room 24 is still the crying baby, and it seems a tiny bit quieter but mostly exactly the same. I listened intently walking to my room. There was a couple arguing, some rooms that I could hear indecipherable talking, and more TVs. The hotel from the hallway seemed to be fully booked. A couple of minutes after I got into my room, I heard footsteps and doors opening and closing. I checked through the spy hole in the door but saw nothing. It felt like everyone was avoiding me. I opened my door and looked down the hallway and I saw a door closed but no people. They must have just gone inside. I called room service and asked for 2 neat double whiskeys to be sent to the room, and I could hear what seemed to be the sounds of a couple having sex through the wall. Hopefully the whiskey will put me to sleep. The door rattled and a familiar voice yelled, "Room service." It was the waiter from the restaurant, quite possibly the most normal staff member of the 3 that I'd met. I took the whiskey from the tray, tipped him a few pounds, and he went on his way, although he kept trying to peek inside the room when I was putting the glasses down and getting some change. I don't know, maybe I'm just overthinking it. Sunday, June 2nd, 1:45 a.m. The couple next door is still having their unrelenting sexual encounter. It's not as loud anymore, but the incessant opening and shutting of doors from the hallway, and the footsteps, like multiple people just walking aimlessly up and down, it's beginning to annoy me. The whiskey had helped to drift off for a little while, but I woke up shortly after. The TV was static, so I flipped through the channels. Channels 1 to 76 were all static. Channel 77 had a grainy image of what appeared to be an old game show that I had never seen before, and the rest were all static again. It made me wonder how everyone else seemed to be able to get their TV to work. I got up to use the toilet. My mouth was dry and my bladder was aching. I turned the light on and immediately turned back around. Something wasn't right. My urge to urinate had dissipated as my heart had thumped. Something just happened, and I couldn't put my finger on it, like a weird scraping or a sliding sound. I scanned the partially lit room with only the glow of the TV and the bathroom light to illuminate as much as possible. I stood absolutely frozen as I squinted to see every dark corner of the room. And then I saw it. My cupboard door was half open. I know that it was closed because I never put any clothes in there. I haven't even been near the cupboard, but one door had been swung halfway open. I switched the light on. Now, with my heart racing, hands trembling and fear building, I really had to pee, but I didn't want to take my eyes off that cupboard. Instead, I walked back over toward the bed and switched the main light on. It lit up a little bit inside, but there was nothing there. I plucked up the courage to just open the door and get it over with. If I didn't do it sooner, I would have ended up peeing myself and feeling like an idiot. I grabbed a portable stove that I usually bring in case I end up camping out somewhere for the night. I raised it up, jolted the other door wide open, and swung the stove. It hit only the air inside the cupboard. I felt so stupid. I checked everywhere else and under the bed 3 times, but there was nothing. And then I felt okay to go and relieve myself of a now shooting pain in my abdomen. I opened my room door once again, just to have a peek down the hall. Again, I found nothing, even though I just heard someone pass my room. I probably won't sleep very well tonight. June 2nd, 7:45 a.m. I did not sleep well last night. The bed was comfortable enough, but the constant banging of doors, coupled with people walking around like mad, kept me from properly getting to sleep. I'm about to head down to breakfast. I'll update you when I return. June 2nd, 8:25 a.m. The breakfast was incredible. It's buffet style, so everything you need is all out, freshly cooked and ready to go. I may have overindulged, but I need the energy. I probably had the equivalent of about 2 full Scottish breakfasts, but once again, I was the only person there. The waiter, the same guy from last night, was very attentive, serving me with cups of coffee and making sure everything was up to standard. His name is Brian. He's a nice guy, and I was happy to tip him £5 for his trouble. I got back to my room and found that it had been cleaned to within an inch of its life, so that's nice. I'm about to try out the shower and then get ready for the day ahead. June 2nd, 8:35 a.m. I was just about to go in the shower when I heard some laughing outside. I sprinted to the window so fast that I almost flew out. People. I just saw 3 people, live humans, entering the maze at the back of the hotel. A man, a woman, and a child. Thank God I'm not insane. Of course there are people here. What the hell was I thinking? I'm thinking of going in myself after my shower. I'll update you soon. June 2nd, 12:11 p.m. I went to the maze and I tried to follow the voices of the people inside, but I couldn't locate anyone. Sometimes they seemed right in front of me, and then all of a sudden far away to my side or behind me. The maze was actually pretty difficult, but when you finally get to the center, there's a beautiful garden and some markings in the ground that make up games or activities, like some kind of life-sized board game. If only there were others that I could play it with. When I got out eventually, I returned to the room to update the blog, and now I'll head down for a quick lunch. June 2nd, 1:05 p.m. I just finished lunch. I had a BLT, a salad, and some orange juice. Again, delicious. The kitchen staff here are incredibly skilled. As I walked back to my room to rest for a half an hour, the same rooms that I passed were still blasting their TVs, the baby still crying, and the room next door was quiet, for now. I'm lying in bed and I already feel pretty tired already. Maybe I'll have an afternoon nap before I head out to wander around the area. June 2nd, 8:36 p.m. I've just woken up to darkness outside and I have no idea how I slept so long. The constant banging of doors and footsteps are seriously irritating me. My head is pounding and the TV is static, and my cupboard door is open again. I'm 90% positive someone has been in my room while I was sleeping. I'm not so sure that I want to sleep here for another night. I feel like 2 days have been wasted. People are acting so strange and I'm feeling horrible. I'm packing my things, going downstairs to complain to Miss Weiss, and then I'm going home. June 2nd, 8:55 p.m. I was just on my way to the reception. As I walked down the hallway, I could hear the usual TVs, people chatting, and the baby still crying. It just seems a bit off. Something isn't right. I knocked on room 24 just to see if everything was okay. It seemed like the child had been crying for days, but no one answered. I knocked on room 20, room 19, room 23. All that TV noises and people chatted inside, but again, no answer from anyone. Please do not judge me, but my curiosity was beyond comprehension at this point. I've done something that I would never dream of doing in a normal situation. I looked through the keyhole of room 20. The TV appeared to be off and I couldn't see much, but I could see what was possibly someone's foot on the bed. I knocked on the door once more, but there was absolutely no movement. I looked through 19 and 18. Nothing. In room 22, I could see someone sitting in a chair, but they looked asleep. Still, perfectly still and facing away from me. I couldn't make out anything but their shape. I tried room 24. What I saw almost made me choke in fear. There were two people in the room, adults cradling a child in their arms, both absolutely still. The child was crying, or at least it was a sound of a child crying. I couldn't quite make sense of what I was seeing, but when I could focus better, I saw that they were dummies like old school crash test dummies you would see on TV or something. No faces, and there were black and yellow circle things on these sides of their heads. I gasped and I sat back on the floor. The baby never stopped crying. What was that? Why were there dummies in the rooms? I checked another couple of rooms and saw old tape recorders playing conversations and background noise. I saw another dummy in each of the rooms too. I felt myself shiver. My spine had 1,000 tiny daggers rolling up it, and my hair stood on end. I went back to my room to think about what I should do next. June 2nd, 9:15 p.m. My room phone rang. Miss Weiss asked why I didn't come down for dinner, and I told her that I wasn't feeling good. I used the opportunity to complain about the other guests to see what she would say. I haven't been sleeping well. The guests next door to me have been very loud, and other guests on the floor are constantly banging doors. Other guests? She had asked. Oh, the other guests. Excuse me, I will come right away and speak to everyone. Hopefully that will help with the noise level. She sounded off, nowhere near as comforting as before. I kept my eye on the spy hole in my door to see if I could see anything. I also put the latch on because I had a very bad feeling at this point. Miss Weiss arrived at my door within 1 minute. She was looking down the hallway, whispering and waving someone over. I saw the giant, smiling barman arrive with what I'm sure was a machete. I only caught the quickest glimpse before Miss Weiss put her finger to her mouth, telling a third person to be quiet. And then she put her thumb over the spy hole. The door knocked and Miss Weiss spoke. Mr. Quinn, could you show me which of your neighbors were making all the noise, please? It'll only take a minute. Her words rang like they were in a tunnel. They echoed in my ears. I felt dizzy, faint, and I was panicking, but I didn't want her to know. Yes, give me 2 minutes. I'm just getting out of the shower. I began pacing around the room, thinking of what I could possibly do. She knocked on the door again. Almost ready, I'm sorry, I shouted from the far end. I looked out the window. If I could hang out and swing over a bit, I could make it to the sloping roof just off to the side, and then probably make it down okay from there. It was really my only option. I dangled my legs, holding onto the sill, and started swinging side to side. I threw my legs up for one last push of momentum and let go, almost breaking my ankles as I crashed to the sloping roof. I began to slide down, and I could now hear banging on the room door and some shouting. I clung to a pipe and slowly lowered myself as low as I could get, before my hands quickly gave up. and I found myself falling to the ground below. When I landed, I looked up, and to my absolute horror, I saw the barman's head leaning out of my window and quickly disappearing again. Time was of the essence, so I sprinted to my car and I grabbed for my keys. I could have cried right on the spot. My car keys were still in my room. Hearing the voices grow louder as 3 people emerged from the hotel entrance, I decided that my only option now was to just run. I ran along the road until I met one of the adjacent houses. It was in darkness, so I rattled the windows as I ran past and hopped the fence to the next. It was also in darkness, but it had a car parked outside. I banged on the windows and door before quickly jumping into the next garden. There was a light on at the far end of this house. I banged frantically on the door and then ran to the window. I saw a family inside, so I banged, but they never responded. I banged hard again, and then I noticed there were black and yellow circles on their heads as they sat motionless in various poses. I felt helpless, drained. I felt sick. I slumped to the ground and sobbed. Why the fuck did I forget my keys? Footsteps quickly found me, and before I could react, the world went dark. My head was spinning. I could taste horrible, thick, coppery saliva running down my throat. I was bound to a chair, both hands and feet. Footsteps approached and a man walked in. I could barely see in the shady dim light, but the silhouette resembled the giant bartender. He had some sort of club or pipe in his hand and a cup of coffee in the other. He sat on a stool in the corner of the room, and then Miss Weiss came in looking very different. Cigarette in her hand, and looking generally more rough for a lack of a better term. She sat at a table across from me, blew smoke in my face and laughed. So, Mr. Quinn, you've made it to the recruitment stage. Well done. Most tend to end up trying to luck by attacking some of us, which doesn't bode well for the vast majority of people who have discovered our secret prematurely. You have been one of the lucky ones. Lucky? I asked, sarcastic but not taking anything away from the absolute fear in my voice. Oh yes, Mr. Quinn, lucky. Only a few have made it this far. The only other option is being buried in the maze, so I would consider your current situation lucky. If you had tried anything else, you would have not been so lucky. I can assure you that much. She glanced over at the hulk of a bartender, who sat staring and smiling. Miss Weiss continued. Terry here. We'll begin your training shortly. It should only be a couple of days, and then if you pass, we will have you fitted with a uniform, and you will be assigned to a post. Sound good? Any questions? Only about 1,000, I thought to myself. I'm not sure I understand what's going on. Are you telling me that I'll be working here? Why? What training are you talking about? I asked in quick succession. I thought that was made quite clear. Of course you'll be working here. You will have a place to stay and a job for life, and you will assist us in our recruitment. We will be expanding soon enough, and are in dire need of more staff. She laughed as if all of that was apparently obvious and I was an idiot for not knowing. As for your training, she continued, it's simple enough. Terry will show you some videos mostly to do with loyalty, obedience, what and what not to do in various situations should any arise within our grounds, as well as some clips on what you can expect to witness while you're with us. Our Brian will interview you on several occasions. It's unlikely that you will sleep for 2 or 3 days, but it's for the best. It'll be over before you know it. She quickly spun on her heels and walked out the sliding wooden door before I could ask anything else. I couldn't believe how nonchalant she was about the way she described all of this to a tied-up, beaten man. I looked at Terry. His bulging eyes and haunting smile now seemed so menacing. I could only glance for a few seconds. A VCR sat on the table. He pointed to a remote control which started a video playing from a projector that took up the entire wall. Terry never moved, so the projection played over him too. Every time the light reflected on his massive eyes, it gave me chills. They never moved from my direction. The 15-minute or so movies was all weird propaganda stuff, like old Nazi and Soviet indoctrination films and horrible clips of genocide. To be honest, I wasn't sure what this was supposed to be teaching me. The movie stopped and then Brian entered the room. "What did you think of what you just saw?" he asked. "I don't really know. I know what it was, but why was I shown this?" I was utterly dumbfounded. "You see, people like Stalin, Hitler, Pol Pot, they showed absolutely no mercy to traitors. The poor souls you saw there being massacred in thousands were traitors. Do you now see what happens to traitors?" "I'm pretty positive that isn't true, Brian. Those people were mostly civilians, killed for who they were, not what they had done. There were babies amongst those victims. How can a baby be a traitor?" "Those people," he screamed and pounded his fist on the table. "Those people were traitors. I don't care who they were. The point is, this is what happens to traitors," he sighed. "It's early now, but you'll see soon enough." He nodded to Terry and left the room. Another video clicked on. It was another clip video. It showed men treating women like dogs in dingy-looking rooms, slapping them and beating them if they didn't comply. Maybe a bowl of water if they were good. There were then a couple of clips of women running, escaping, and being hunted down by two guys with crossbows. The next video started immediately after. It showed some of the most horrible scenes that I've ever witnessed. Men having their hearts cut out while still alive, cannibalism, torture of women and men, people having their bodies mutilated, animals being slaughtered, anything you can think of, and it was on that tape. He made me watch it for hours while he just sat there smiling and staring at me. Miss Weiss entered the room again, smoking still. "Mr. Quinn, do you understand why you're being shown these videos?" My eyes felt hot. Horrible scenes looped in my head. I said nothing. "It's to give you a sense of reality. Everything you have witnessed happened to someone and was in turn committed by someone. This is what we are capable of, and this happens every day. It's not to dehumanize you. It's more to desensitize you to the wicked nature of humans." She looked at Terry and then back at me. Words were forming in my mouth but could not escape. "We must teach you obedience and fear of disobedience. We must instill indestructible loyalty in our staff. Fear of disloyalty and unconditional love for that fear. Love for your colleagues and love for your new place in this world." She stared into my glazed eyes as if she was listening to my thoughts. "Let me tell you something," she began again. "Terry here was my first recruit. There are 8 of us here, but Terry was the first. He came here looking for a place to stay the night on his way to the Shetlands for work. He was my first customer when I opened 4 years ago. As he was the only one here, we sat and drank all night, talked about all manner of things." She looked mournfully at Terry, who sat and smiled away. "We drank until the sun came up. He couldn't drive that day, of course, so I offered him another night free of charge. And we did the exact same thing the following night. I eventually convinced Terry to work here with me. It's closer to Glasgow where he's from, and I offered good money and free accommodation. The hotel business isn't easy. You have staff coming and going, and you never really know who you're hiring. So we came up with an idea to create perfect staff members who will follow orders to the letter and never question authority. They will work here until they cannot work anymore, and best of all, They will at absolutely no expense to the company, and do it because they want to do it. I am recruiting now because I'm about to open a new hotel and I need more staff. She smiled at me as my mouth gaped open. By the end of your sessions, you will give everything to me, to our company. You will follow my lead and will never question a thing. She stopped and glanced over at Terry. If you ever feel a question forming on your lips, I suggest that you keep it to yourself. Isn't that right, Terry? She continued to stare at me as I turned to Terry, still smiling as his mouth hung open. I felt my stomach turn. Terry's tongue had been completely removed from his mouth. I looked back at Miss Weiss. She was smiling with smoke billowing from her flared nostrils. And he's my favorite, she chuckled. So best to just keep your mouth shut from now on. Brian will be in shortly to ask you more questions, and I'll be back later. And Terry left another video playing. More murder and torture videos intermingled with short, grotesque, weird clips that I can't even explain. He followed Miss Weiss out of the room. About half an hour later, Brian walks in and sits down at the table. The video had stopped playing moments before. So, Stephen, he ruffled some papers. I just need to ask you a few questions in private. You can be honest with me. Miss Weiss has a strict testing procedure, and she will never see these notes. All I have to do is assess where we take this process. Does that make sense? None of this makes sense, I replied. My voice was weak and tired. Perfect, he said. Then we're making progress, he smiled. Now I understand these questions may seem random, but you're just going to have to trust me here. It'll all make sense eventually. He stared at me dead in the eyes. So let's start with an easy one. Question 1, what's your biggest fear? He asked. I paused for a few seconds. I don't really know. Dying, maybe? The unknown. I really don't know. That's fine, Brian said. There are no wrong answers here. Question 2, he continued. Have you ever felt like you wanted to do something drastic, something that can't be undone? For instance, when standing near the edge of a train platform when a train is coming, or on a bridge perhaps. Have you ever felt the urge to jump and wondered why you felt that way? I looked at him confused. To be fair, I had felt that before, but I always thought everyone had at one point. Yeah, I have, but... Before I could finish what I was saying, he was already scribbling on a piece of paper. Question 3. Have you ever seen a real dead body? While he asked this, he held up the paper that he was scribbling on. In large, scribbled words it read, Do not react. They are listening. Do you want me to repeat the question? He asked. So many things were running through my mind. Was this a test? Was he genuinely trying to help? I did need him to repeat the question because I couldn't think straight. Yes, sorry, I'm feeling so tired. What was it again? I managed to stutter. Have you ever seen a dead body? He quickly fired back. He sounded agitated, and I wasn't sure if that was for show or if he was getting annoyed at me. I saw my grandmother when I was young. It was an open casket funeral, and that's the only time. I watched as he scribbled on another sheet of paper. Okay, Stephen, that's fine, he said. He held up the other piece of paper as he spoke. The paper read, Answer question 5. Leave immediately, quick and quiet. Keys on the bed. I'll stall them. Okay, question 4. How do you feel about capital punishment? Do you believe in an eye for an eye, carried out by the justice system or otherwise? He scribbled more erratically. I still didn't know if this was some kind of test or not. I don't think I've ever thought about it much. I would probably disagree with it, but probably most people would say that until it was something happening to them. If it was my parents or a child murdered by someone, then I would probably like to see them dead too. Really, I don't know though. That's fantastic, Stephen, Brian said, smiling, holding another sheet of paper. This one said, "Get ready, be quiet. There are others outside. I won't make it. Try to get help." "Stephen, don't start falling asleep. Sit up straight. We only have another 16 questions, then we're all done." He walked behind me, sliced the rope that bound my hands, and sat quickly back down. "Shoulders straight, head up. That's better. Question 5. He nodded at me and I nodded back. I frantically untied the rope at my ankles. He continued, "Have you ever filed a report to the authorities that resulted in another person's arrest?" "No," I said, and immediately stood up, ready to go. Brian held his hands up and rotated his finger as if to keep me talking. "Nothing at all," he said, eyes widening, urging me to speak. Once when I was a child, 3 boys punched and kicked me in school. I told the head and my teacher, but I never told any police. They were kids. They would have never been arrested. But if you consider the headmaster an authoritarian figure, and the arrest as punishment, then yes, I guess. They were punished, but that's the only time." He jerked his thumb to the side towards the door. I began walking lightly and swiftly. Brian repeated what I had said as he wrote it down. "Okay, give me a second to write all that down, Stephen, to make sure that I don't miss anything." I slid the door very carefully to the side. Brian still talking behind me. "So, you were in school and some kids bullied you. Okay. Then you said you spoke to teachers in the head, but never the police." I walked out the door as Brian's voice faded. There was another smaller door. I opened it and stepped out. I couldn't believe it. I had just stepped out of the cupboard in my hotel room. Bastards were probably in here all the time while I slept, no doubt. And Brian was right. My keys were lying on the pillow. I picked them up, trying not to jangle them too much. I had a quick look out the window. It was almost pitch dark. I saw a man and a woman talking with cigarettes in their hands. There were 2 people that I hadn't seen before. I did consider taking the window route again, but that was now a no-go. The room door was slightly ajar, so I was able to open it without sound. I presumed that he left it that way for me. The halls were very dimly lit, almost no light at all. I tried to walk fast while staying quiet, but my legs were trembling. I heard Brian shout as I reached the stairwell, "Wake up, Stephen!" And then I heard a bang. I looked back and saw Miss Weiss and Terry emerge from a door down from my room. They made a beeline for room 28. This was it. I bolted down the wooden stairs, praying that nobody was at the bottom. I sprinted along the hallway and came to the reception. 2 men were sitting in the bar area and looked right at me. They stood up and I started running. I made it to the door, but it was locked. I dashed back to the reception and pulled the huge PC monitor over, ripping the wires out. As I did, just as they had entered the lobby, I launched it through the window and dove through straight after, cutting myself in multiple places as I landed in a bush filled with broken glass. My car sat across the road. I got myself up and saw the hotel front door swing open. My legs were like jelly. They barely carried me to my car. But with every last morsel of strength that I had in my body, I made it with nothing to spare. Key ready, I threw it in the ignition and locked the doors as the 2 men, who were wearing chef whites, battered my windows and pulled my door handles. They started kicking my doors and windows, screaming as I was able to throw the car into reverse and get out of the space. One of them fell to the ground as I spun around. The other made a jump from the windscreen in my rearview. I saw Terry running from the hotel, wielding a huge machete. He was unnaturally fast. He gave chase all the way to the end of the road. I flung my car left just as I saw headlights switch on behind me. This wasn't going to be good. The closest place that I could think that would have any sort of civilization was really far away, about an hour's drive. I just put the boot down. These roads are dangerous, but I had to take the risk. If I get caught, who knows what they might do. I had a reasonable head start, but every straight section of the road, I would see the headlights come into view. There were two in pursuit. They would gain some ground, but when the corners hit, I seemed to have the upper hand and would increase the gap. This was the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me up until this point in my life. Speeding on these roads with the lowest visibility, and a bunch of lunatics behind you trying to catch you. There's nowhere to go, but still going forward and to hope for the best. When I reached the town, these streetlights made me feel safe. I saw people, cars, and life. I have never felt so relieved. I hadn't seen the cars behind me for the last couple of miles. I assumed they didn't want to venture into a town with cameras and witnesses to kidnap someone. I felt free, liberated, and safe. I wept on my steering wheel. I waited about 2 hours to regain some composure. I thought about Brian. I can't say for sure, but I don't imagine he's still alive or will be for much longer. There was a definite feeling about him from our first encounter, that he was less programmed than the others. If helping me was a death sentence, then he knew it, and he gave his life to stop them from enslaving another innocent person. I hope that whatever they do, he suffers as little as possible. I owe my life to a dead man. I began driving home after fueling up and getting some water. Every time a car would appear behind me, I would get that crippling fear, but nothing ever happened. I made it home without incident. I wanted to get in and get a shower and lie in my own bed as fast as possible. I just wanted to sleep and try my best to forget. I opened my front door and stepped inside. I was so happy to be home. I threw all the mail on the table and started taking my bloodied clothes off. There were cuts all over me, little bits of glass poking out of a few places on my body. I walked back to the hall toward the bathroom and caught a glimpse of an envelope. A plain, blue envelope with no postmark and only my name written on it. I opened it. My blood ran cold as I read. The Creepypasta Hotel headed letter. Dear Mr. Quinn, I am writing you to express my deepest sorrow at your premature departure from the Creepypasta Hotel. Upon your hasty exit you did, in fact, manage to forget to settle your bill. As we understand that these things happen, and to show how grateful we are that you chose to stay with us, and also how sad we are that you had to leave so quickly, we will not be charging you for the full stay. I have had a staff member deliver your revised bill and receipt personally for your records. Payment of this new amount will be taken from the original payment method and details that you provided upon your booking. We hope to see you again in the near future. Kindest regards, signed, Catherine Wise. They know where I live. I googled this hotel and it has changed massively in appearance in the 8 years since I was a guest. I just wonder if it has changed in any other way. If the hotel still houses these same corrupt, sick-minded individuals. I decided that I would phone to inquire about booking a room just to see what would happen. I dialed the number on my phone. Good morning, Creepypasta Hotel, how may I help you? A very familiar, soft voice spoke, comforting, inviting, professional, even haunting. I remained silent, listening intently. Mr. Quinn, how may I help you, sir? The voice became a long, low, breathy laugh. I hung my phone up and threw it on the floor. Miss Wise's face is buried in my mind's eye. I got goosebumps having flashbacks of the hotel. What compelled me to find out if the hotel was still run by Miss Wise now has me shrouded in a deep worry and sick feeling. I wanted to call to be sure because of the website. There are now more rooms available. And what's more unsettling, they have family rooms. I seriously hope that nobody brings their children to this hotel. I am currently sifting through my blogs from other years. I will post anything else that piques my interest as soon as I can. In the meantime, if I have any more updates on this one in particular, I'll be sure to keep you all in the loop. All my love, Steven. Last week, a beautiful girl moved into the rundown house next door. She had long blonde hair and a slim figure. She's maybe 18 or 19. The first time that I saw her, she was sitting on her porch wearing denim shorts and a t-shirt, and gnawing on a chicken bone. She stripped off the meat and chewed on the actual bone before crunching it in half and swallowing it down. I was attracted and disturbed in equal measure. Still, I wanted to straight away ask her out on a date, though maybe for a movie rather than a meal. I would have been amazed if she had said yes. I'm 21 and I still live with my parents, and I went away to college for a while, but I dropped out. I stay up all night watching horror movies and playing games and spending a good chunk of the day asleep. I know that my parents' patience is stretched to the limit. I promised them that I'll get my acting gear, find a job, and move out. I mean it, I really do. If only there weren't so many distractions in life. With the sun set on another day, I was trying to decide what film to watch, a classic or to try something new, when I noticed something moving in our backyard. My parents' house is modest. They don't have much worth stealing, and there isn't anything fancy such as security cameras. I pressed my face pretty much against the window to try and see what was out there. There are cats, foxes. I was hoping for one of these. I think they're pretty cool. I was surprised to see that it was the girl from next door. I slipped into shock as I watched her lift the lid of our trash can and start to poke around in there, not with her hands, but with her face. She stuck her head right in there. Her hair was tied up in a ponytail to stop it from getting dirty, I thought. And then my mind went back to reeling. What the hell was she doing? My question was answered when she stood back up straight. In her mouth, she had the remains of the joint of meat that we had had for dinner 3 nights before, and had been providing snacks and fillings for sandwiches since then. There must have only been scraps of meat left, some fat, bone, and marrow. The girl glanced around. I ducked down nervously, as if I was the one doing something weird. I chanced to look a minute later and saw her climbing back over the fence, which divided our 2 properties. I didn't watch any movies that night. I sat staring at an empty screen. By dawn, my heartbeat had almost returned to normal, and I had worked out what was going on. She must have been starving. Maybe it was poverty, or maybe she was being abused. Whatever it was that drove her to scavenge in trash cans just to get something to eat. I had always wondered if there were people in our country living in hideous conditions like these. Their suffering hidden. Well, I had seen it with my own eyes now, and I was determined to help. Blinking in the morning light, I really was not used to being up and around before mid-afternoon. I went over to her house. She must have seen me coming because, just as I stepped onto her porch, the door opened and she came out. She put her fingers to her lips. I could hear movement inside of the house. Her parents, I guessed. Had she just warned me not to disturb them? I had no idea what the right thing to do was, so I decided to plow on. I cleared my throat. I'm David, I said. I live next door. I would start with us getting to know each other. I would gain her confidence, and then I would be there for her, be the person that she needed. She stood on her porch and looked at me. Her eyes were emerald green. I had never been close enough before to see this. Sweat trickled down my neck. Nothing to do with the heat of the day. I managed to go on. Could I ask your name? She tilted her head in response to my question. Her eyes grew wider and did not speak. Me, David, I said, and pointed at my chest, and then pointed at her. You. Still nothing. My shoulders sagged and I sighed. Sorry, bad joke. I don't know if there had been a moment or any connection between us, but if there had been, it was gone. I joined her in silence before finally admitting defeat. It was nice to meet you, I said, and I turned tail. The rest of that day was horrible. I could not stop thinking about her for even a few seconds. I kept glancing out to see if she was back out on the porch, but there was no sign of anyone. I spent intervals staring at my laptop. At one point, I drew 2 overlapping hearts. I wrote, "Trash can girl" in one, clicked in the other and started to type David. But then I deleted the whole thing. I had never felt so dumb in my entire life, or so sad. Around dusk, I dragged myself out of the house and I walked the streets. Was this what was being in love was like? If it was pretty lousy. And then I had a brainwave. The weight of this girl's heart was clearly her stomach. I had just about enough on my account to buy a pizza. Meat feast seemed the obvious choice from what I had seen. I would buy a pizza, take it round, and she would devour it, and I would try again. My name is David, what's yours? Genius, it's simple, I thought, as I carried the pizza to her house. I waited for a moment at the base of the porch, expecting her to have seen me again and make an appearance. My heart was beating 10 to the dozen. Nothing. No swinging open door. Not even a creak. The smell of the pizza was drifting up at me. I went to knock on the door, and when I touched it, it moved. It wasn't locked. I pushed it open an inch and called out quietly, "Hello?" There was no reply. I can't really tell you what I was thinking apart from the prospect of seeing her again. "Hello?" I tried again, still nothing, so I opened the door and went inside. The room that I entered was dark and kind of smelly, to be honest. To be very honest, it smelled like a public toilet on a hot day. There wasn't much furniture, no carpet. My eyes were adjusting to the darkness, and I thought that I could make out tear marks across one of the chairs, as if someone had slashed it. They're going through hard times, I reminded myself. That was why I was here. The knight in shining armor with his greasy cheese and tomato and pepperoni and beef and salami and chicken treasure. "Hey," I said. My voice was getting shaky at this stage. It was pretty creepy in there, and no one appeared to be at home. I could make out the shape of another open door at the far end of the room, but I could not see where it led, and I didn't have the nerve to find out. I decided to call it a day. I would find somewhere to leave the pizza, and the next time that I saw her, I would explain that it was for me. As the start of a beautiful conversation, I thought. I was looking around for a surface that was closest to clean when I heard a snarl. My guts tightened. They had a dog, and it sounded like a big one. I was considering dropping the pizza and running when I saw 2 specks of red coming towards me through the gloom from the direction of the open door. Something on 4 legs that snarled again. The pizza box was shaking really bad on my hands by now, and my fingers had dug into the cardboard. I felt the heat of the pizza burning my fingertips, but I could not ease up. I was terrified. And then things got a whole lot worse. A second creature padded out into view. It too walked on all 4 legs. Its eyes were red, bloodshot, and it brought with it a stench of stale urine and something much worse. I started to gag. I wanted to scream now because my eyes were fully adjusted to the darkness. and I could see that this was not a dog, but a woman. She was smeared in filth. She crept towards me, paused, and sniffed. The first creature came up to her side, and it was a man. Feral and dirt-encrusted, but human. His hair was matted and jumping with fleas. He was staring at me. Suddenly, he bared his teeth and he reared up, and my bladder let go. Sure, love can make you lose control, but fear, raw, pure fear, can do much worse to you. And then she appeared. She walked out into view. The girl next door. My trash can girl. She was wearing the same t-shirt and denim shorts. Her face was fixed into an expression of pure concentration. She was struggling with something. I had no idea what until she said, "No." Her voice was cracked and strained. She was clearly finding it a fight to speak, but she persevered. "Mom. Dad. Please, no." The man who had reared up dropped back onto all fours and began to circle me. Drool hung from his mouth and left a trail across the bare floorboards. I stood there shaking, trying not to move, trying not to breathe. The girl remained very still. The only thing she did was tilt her head to one side, as she had done the first time that we met, and I realized that she wanted to know what was in the box. I lifted the lid so that she could see the pizza, and I held out the box to her. She moved towards me until we were close enough to touch. She took the box from me and walked away. The man and the woman followed. She on 2 legs, they on 4. I was left alone. Over the last few days, I've got my act in gear. I've written a resume and I'm spending all my time applying for jobs. I have also emailed my old college, asked them if there was any way that they would take me back. I am determined, more determined than I've ever been in my life. As soon as I can, I'm going to get the hell away from here, and I'm going to ask her to come with me. This is not an easy story to tell. Just thinking about what happened still gives me chills. Lately, I've been seeing a therapist to talk about what I saw, about what lives amongst us humans, that lives within the darkest depths of the ocean. However, he never seems to believe me. He tends to blame everything I saw on my trauma, and tells me that my mind is making up these thoughts that aren't truly real. I am writing this now in hopes that you, whoever you are, will believe my story. Well, here it is. I've been working as a marine biologist for quite some time, a few years to say the least. I used to love everything about the ocean. I was so mesmerized by it all. The glistening water, the plants, the sea life. Even the size was all the more reason on why I became a marine biologist. It was the middle of October, and a higher up from my research team gave me a call about a new unexplored region, somewhere off the coast of the Pacific. Now, you may think somewhere so far on the ocean may have made me decline the decision to go and explore such a vast open area. But no. In fact, just the thought of the idea made me ecstatic. I accepted the offer, made the arrangements, and quickly set off. The research team consisted of 4 people: Mike, Liz, my best friend Jackson, and myself. Together, we have explored all kinds of places, discovered the most bizarre sets of animal life, and even became the first group to do a deep-sea dive inside the Mariana Trench. We were a truly fierce team, and every dive that we took, every exploration we've set out on, it was all done with little to no fear. I've always been fond of the ocean, yes, but I can't recall the time where I was actually scared of it. Well, that is up until now. We set off early morning, wasting no time at all to get to our destination. So, what do you think will be out there? I don't know, a new species maybe. Mike and Liz loved to discover new types of animals while me and Jackson were more fond of the plant life. Hey, if so, let's hope it's nothing big enough to eat us, said Jackson, approaching the side of the boat. He gazed out at the open body of water, watching the city slowly disappear from our view. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. Ah, you smell that? The fresh air of open adventures, said our captain, cutting off Jackson as he spoke. Now, let's try not to be out here for too long, you understand? It's an area that we do not know of. We all agreed and began making plans on what specific things to keep an eye on. Well, being so far out, there's obviously not going to be any type of ground level whatsoever, and the chances of us even getting an inch close to it are very slim. Yeah, Mike's right. We should have the two of us search for unknown species near the surface, and the other two explore deeper, said Jackson, caressing the lining of his jaw as a sign of thought. It was no surprise that Mike and Liz would be together. They're practically partners in crime. How about me and Jackson dive down? Evan and Liz, you guys stay at the top. This was surprising to all of us. Why the sudden change? I questioned, glancing over at Liz. Oh, I don't know. Just thought that we would swap out partners for once. Yeah. Jackson put his hand on Mike's shoulder. Idiot. We're all partners here, but I guess switching it up a bit wouldn't hurt. Liz approached me with a cheerful look. Then it settled. Let's make this a great exploration. Time went by pretty fast, and it was finally time for us to take our dive. As I approached the deck, Mike and Liz already had their gear on, and Jackson was just about to dive in. Come on, hurry up and put that last little bit of gear on and let's get going. Mike sounded so excited, more than usual in fact. Yeah, just give me a sec. After finally putting on the last bit, I hurried over to the side of the boat. Jackson and Mike dropped in first, and then Liz. However, before I could get my chance to touch the water, our captain rushed out. Picking up signs of a storm on the radar, which is quite odd. I didn't see any type of signs of a storm approaching until now. You guys better hurry back. And then there was a loud boom. A nice-sized wave hit the blind side of the boat, sending me flying off into the water and pushing the boat into the others. I heard and put on my mask as the power of the wave forced me down under. I watched Mike and Jackson get pushed back further and eventually dragged down by the follow-up of more waves. I grabbed a hold of Liz's arms before she could get pulled away any further, and we both swam up. Jesus, Captain, are you... Oh my God. What is it? I followed Liz's eyes up and saw a giant, monstrous wave approach us, ready to crash down right onto the boat. Captain! The sound of the water crashing and flowing in all sorts of directions snapped me back. I tried to keep calm, but in all my years, I had never been in this type of situation before. Liz, where's Liz? I looked around, giving myself a headache due to how fast I turned my head. Crackling. Evan, I'm right here. The radio sounded distorted and Liz was almost unrecognizable. Liz, can you hear me? What the heck just happened? Questioned Jackson over the staticky radio. We got hit and I'm too far under to see the boat. Okay, let me just... Jackson, you there? Jesus, Evan, please tell me you're seeing what I'm seeing, said Liz, her voice sounding shaky. Confused, I looked around and to my horror, I saw it. It looked like the edge of the world. Just how deep were we? The ground ended off in a completely straight line, and beyond that was nothing but pitch black darkness. What the heck is a cliff doing here? Mike, oh God, I thought that we lost you, said Liz in worry. Oh nah, still here. Jackson, Evan. I'm here, but we lost comms with Jackson. Wait, I think I see him. look down at the edge. Me and Liz both looked down and saw Jackson slowly moving off of the edge. Jackson, what the heck are you doing? Get back up here right now. I tried to stop him. We all did, but he wouldn't listen. I do not know what happened to him, but I can still hear the words in my head. The final words that Jackson said before. As Jackson slowly came off the edge, he said something that threw all three of us off. Do you see it? It's down there, waiting for the right moment. What are you talking about, Jackson? What's waiting? Just come on back and let's get out of here, please. Jackson let out a small gasp. It says, thank you. Thank you for awakening me. You have set me free. And then, from a calming voice to the sound of fear, he said, Oh my God, guys, we shouldn't have come here. We aren't alone. Jackson started violently thrashing his arms, trying to swim up and away from the dark abyss. It's coming. Oh God, it's coming. It's gonna destroy us all. And that's when we finally saw it. A long, dark, greenish, and sort of scaly long body quickly rushed up. In size, it was massive, about the size of 4 great-sized mansions. But even then, I don't think even that is enough to explain just how huge the thing was. I watched Jackson get swallowed by it whole. The mouth area was so dang huge that it took up most of the abyss. The teeth were the size of giant icy glaciers and were very, very sharp. However, that wasn't the scariest part about its mouth. What frightened me the most was the rows of teeth the thing had. In a circular look, I saw 5 rows of teeth stick out. Holy crap, said Mike. The creature then took off further away. We watched for what felt like 10 minutes. Its body swam away. And then from the darkness, I saw 2 giant white lights. Though they weren't lights at all, they were the creature's pupils as its face slowly approached us. It spoke to us, its voice deep and stern. You do not belong. You have been abandoned, and soon you will be forgotten as well. I saw its body make all kinds of curves and rotations in the distance. There seemed to be no end to it. Mike, what are you doing? Liz questioned in terror. I looked down to see Mike moving towards the creature. I do not belong. I've been abandoned and I will soon be forgotten. I am nothing. And those were Mike's last words. As I saw him move ever so slightly towards the creature, almost as if he was being pulled into it, I looked at the creature and saw its mouth. Its mouth was open, and it stretched so far out that it could fit multiple of our boats inside of it. As I stared at it, I found myself muttering something. I do not belong. The same words said by Mike. I quickly forced myself to turn away. Liz, turn away now! But she was nowhere to be found. I looked down once more and saw her, repeating the same words as Mike, and slowly moving towards the creature's mouth. No. I wanted to say something, believe me I did, but I just couldn't. I knew that I wouldn't be able to get through to her, and I knew what was going to happen if I stayed any longer. I quickly began to swim up as my heart pounded inside my chest. Please let me make it. In the distance, I saw the boat slowly sinking down to the ground. Oh God, no. The surface slowly began to appear. Just a little more. And then, after what felt like forever, I finally broke the surface and began to swim faster than I've ever swam in my life. I do not know what direction I was heading in, but I did not care, just as long as it wasn't in the same direction as that thing. I don't even think that I can call it a creature anymore. I think I swam for about 15 minutes before my arms got tired, and my legs began to give out on me. There was nothing in sight, and I soon gave up hope. I laid myself back and floated, and as I did, I began to have flashbacks. Flashbacks that went back to when I first discovered the ocean, to when my parents had took me swimming at the beach for the first time. It all appeared to me as a blur, but it slowly faded away into darkness. I awoke inside of a hospital. Doctors surrounded me as I tried to keep my eyes open. "Stay still and don't move." "Jackson, Mike." "The search team were not able to find your friends, nor the boat. It's lucky they even found you." It was then that I had one last flashback, one last image in my brain. It was a vision of the thing that took my friends, Jackson, Mike, Liz, all long gone. Doctors say that I ended up fainting shortly after waking up and I became unresponsive. I then went into a short-term coma, one only lasting a few weeks to a month. When I woke up, my hospital room was empty, but the space around me was filled with get well cards and colorful balloons by my bedside. I was later checked out of the hospital and got to return to my home. Now, did I return back to work? Of course not. I'll never go back, not after what had happened. After a while, I began experiencing night terrors and hallucinations every once in a while. Heck, I even developed thalassophobia, the fear of deep bodies of water just like the ocean. I soon started to feel like I was losing my mind. I started hearing voices in my head, and visions of watching my friends be swallowed by that monstrous thing. My entire life felt like it was falling apart, which is why I eventually ended up going to a therapist, but even he couldn't help. Now I find myself writing this, not knowing when to end it. But what I do know is that we are not alone, and this world does not belong to us. Update. Monday evening, 8:45 p.m., Evan Parker was found deceased in his own home. Caused self-inflicted. Evan Parker was found dangling in his basement from one of the pipes. From the looks of it, he had been like that for days. Upon entering his house, the team saw writing written all over the walls of the living room and basement. Some sort of saying that read, "I do not belong. I have been abandoned and I will soon be forgotten. I am nothing." Under his body, there was a different saying. It read, "We are not alone." I first heard it one early morning at 4 a.m. I had woken up and I could not fall back asleep. After twisting and turning for what must have been half an hour, I decided to try the good old stop moving and pretend that your body is a brick strategy. That's when I noticed it. A faint, mechanical throbbing sound. At the time, I didn't make much of it, and in retrospect, I never should have. Eventually, I managed to fall back asleep. When I woke up the next morning, the sound was gone. Or was it still there? It was impossible to distinguish due to all of the other sounds buzzing around. I couldn't tell really, but there was definitely a possibility. After all, I live in an apartment located in a street that is pretty busy during the day. So, such a faint sound would be next to impossible to hear at any other moment during the hours when the city is asleep. That night, I woke up again. I no longer am sure of what hour it is, but it had to have been pretty early. This was not an unusual occurrence for me, as waking up at the worst possible hours and being unable to fall back asleep had been my specialty ever since I was a kid. But this time, part of me believed that my brain had intentionally woken the rest of my body up in order for me to check out whether the noise was still there. It was. I got up from my bed, walking from room to room. I attempted to locate the source of the noise. Truth be told, this was a rather short venture, as my apartment isn't that big in the first place. But still, I could not notice any significant difference in sound anywhere. The pulse was always there. Why am I even doing this? I asked myself. What does it matter where that sound even comes from? It's not that much of a nuisance anyway. I can barely hear the thing. Well, that much was true. I had tried recording the sound with my phone, but it was impossible to point out in the recordings. It was that faint. I went back to bed and I fell asleep without much trouble. You know that when you're dreaming and your alarm suddenly starts to ring, and the sound of your alarm becomes a part of the dream that you're having. Well, that had started happening with the throbbing, except the sound wasn't loud enough to wake me, like an alarm would. Although, I'm not sure how grateful I should be for that, because in my dreams, the sound came from rats in the ceiling, about to gnaw through it before falling on me and eating me alive. It came from a gigantic monster, asleep somewhere below the foundations of my apartment, closer and closer to waking up. It came from a ghost, watching me every night, laughing as I tried to locate it, no doubt preparing a nefarious scheme. Of course, I knew all of this was crazy, but those nightmares were taking a toll on my mental health. Eventually, I looked for answers online. Electronic devices were the culprits that the most often came up. I had already gone around my apartment multiple times, unsuccessfully trying to pinpoint the noise to any particular device, so I didn't think this could be it. But one night, after a particularly terrifying nightmare, involving my own pulse missing from my chest, and me desperately attempting to find it before it had escaped forever, I woke up in a sweat. I walked up to the circuit breaker of my apartment, and I shut the power off. The noise was still there. A shiver ran down my spine, but I quickly reassured myself that it meant nothing. There were plenty of other perfectly reasonable explanations as to the source of the noise. There was nothing to worry about and absolutely no need to overreact. But rationality did not keep the nightmares from happening. I knew that if I could only find the source, my subconscious would stop freaking out about that nocturnal noise and stop the nightmares. So I looked for other possible answers. Another possibility that I read about online was the heating system. I knew that was somewhere in the basement of my building. I opened my apartment door and came face to face with one of my neighbors who was heading for her own. She was a 30-something woman who already lived there when I had first moved in. And besides that, I did not know much about her, except for the fact that she had cats and would occasionally walk along the gutter that connected her window and my own. Sometimes the cats would wander into my apartment, at what point they would occasionally refuse to leave. When that happened, I would carry them back to her door and knock. She would then apologize and would say that there's no need, as I love cats and their visits always brighten up my day. That was pretty much the extent of our relationship. That and the small talk that would happen when we would cross each other in the corridor, like what was happening just now. "Hey, I haven't seen your cats in a while. How are they?" I'd asked. "Oh, hi, they're doing great. I guess I just don't let my window open as much in the winter, so there isn't much opportunity for them to escape," she answered, a shy smile on her lips. To be fair, I already knew the answer. I rarely ever saw her cats in the wintertime. I only brought it up because I had run into her unexpectedly, and I needed to come up with some small talk in a pinch. After a small silence, I decided to risk it. Have you noticed anything weird, like faint noises recently, especially at night when it's really quiet? A weird noise, no. I haven't noticed anything out of the ordinary recently. Sorry about that. I did not know whether to be relieved or worried. As I looked into her eyes before parting ways, I noticed how tired she looked. Dark circles, a weak voice. Could it be the noise that was keeping her up as well? I shook my head. No, she had just told me that she hadn't heard anything recently. There were plenty of factors that could lead to a person looking tired. Despite my best efforts, the doubt lingered. What if she was lying to me? I made my way to the basement without any other encounters. The door to the boiler room was locked. This didn't come as a surprise to me, but I had hoped that if the throbbing noise's origin really was this place, it would be stronger here. I put my ear against the door. I heard a soft buzzing noise and other low-pitched sounds, but nothing resembled the throbbing that I could hear upstairs. Disappointed, I turned around and made my way back upstairs. And that's when I noticed that the lock to the electrical room was broken. I timidly made my way inside, but couldn't hear anything resembling the pulse. I quickly left the room and went back to my apartment. Due to the nature of this forum, I assume most of you know about the hum. Well, I had run into that phenomenon while looking for explanations online. For those that don't know or aren't aware, the hum is a widespread phenomenon. A low-frequency sound that can be heard in many places around the world. The rational explanation is that there isn't just one single hum, but multiple ones coming from different origins, and they're described in the same way by the locals. Oftentimes, the source would just be an old-fashioned building or something of the sort. And maybe this was the case here too. Maybe the sound did not come from my apartment building at all. That night, I walked out into the streets. My city isn't really that big, and I live in a pedestrian street, so traffic is non-existent here. The night, it was dead silent. The conditions to hear the hum were nearly perfect. But I heard nothing. This was just another dead end. I made my way back upstairs. As soon as I had settled down, I heard that all too familiar throbbing sound again. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I had a bit of a nervous breakdown. I could not take the non-stop nightmares anymore. I just knew the sound was nothing supernatural or nefarious, but my subconscious wouldn't just give me a break. I hadn't gotten proper rest in weeks. I wanted to call the police, an ambulance, the fire brigade, a freaking priest even, but I realized how ridiculous all of this was. The throbbing sound was like insanity knocking at my door. If I did not find its source, my mind would eventually answer its call and be consumed whole. I made my mind up. The only explanation left was that this sound came from an electronical source. I had already switched everything off in my apartment, but maybe it came from one of my neighbors. Surely none of them would mind if I just switched the power off in my entire building in the middle of the night, especially if it was only for a few minutes. Their fridges and freezers would stay cold enough until I turned it all back on. The computers that they left on standby would shut down, sure. But hey, it serves them right for not saving their work and shutting them down properly. As far as I'm concerned, this is an ecologically friendly move. I nervously laughed to myself. Of course, the truth was that I just wanted to be done with all of this. Thankfully for me, the lock to the electrical room was still broken. It was easy for me to make my way in, and so was turning everything off. I painstakingly walked up the stairs, all the way to my apartment, lighting my way with my cell phone. I entered my room and sat on my bed for a few minutes. My own heart was throbbing, partly from anticipation, and partly because of all the stairs that I had walked up. But eventually, it settled back down. Nothing. The night was silent like it should be, and like I had always thought it was before first hearing the pulse. I grinned from ear to ear. The sound really did come from an electrical source. There was nothing to worry about. I made my way back downstairs, making sure to turn everything back on as the way it was. This time, I could use the elevator though. Just like the absolute silence of the night, this was another thing that I took for granted, and now felt grateful for. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. The noise was no longer a source of anguish. It was the weekend, so I could afford to turn my alarm off and just rest for as long as I needed. I woke up at 3 p.m. starving. I left my apartment to get a quick bite. I was heading back to my apartment door when I saw my neighbor at the end of the corridor, her head down. As I got closer, I saw that she was painstakingly trying to find the right key on her keychain, but that was not what had bothered me. She was sobbing. I was about to walk up to her to ask her what was wrong so I could try to lift her spirits, but then I remembered. She's always been afraid of hospitals. She had told me that day her cat had wandered into my apartment once more, and as I had brought it back and she had opened the door to let it back in, I saw an old woman lying down in a makeshift bed, tied to these shoddy-looking medical devices keeping her alive. I can't go against her wishes, but she's in too bad of a state to live on her own. I just had to bring her here. The sobbing continued. My neighbor had just given up on finding the right key and was just holding her head in her hands. Too ashamed to talk to her, I silently reached for my door and made my way inside. I had slept peacefully indeed. The electronical noises coming from that old lady's medical devices had no longer been a source of concern for me. I had no longer heard them in my dreams, nor did I hear the sirens that had come to pick her up that morning.